Welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be discussing how to hire a developer in 2026. And actually, one of the bigger questions we need to be asking ourselves is, do we even need to hire a developer in 2026? Now, a little bit about my background to give you some context about what qualifies me to even talk about this. My name's Konstanty, for those that don't know me. I've spent 20 years in people advisory and talent acquisition. I've also built 3 businesses. I've had 2 exits. I sat on the board of an international group where I dealt with mergers and acquisitions and post-merger integrations of small and medium-sized businesses into the group. I've been an advisor to startups and scale-ups across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. I've interviewed over 12,000 candidates, and I've made over 1,000 successful hires. Of those 12,000 candidates that I have interviewed, roughly half were developers. Now, I want to open today's talk with some harsh truths that I don't think get enough coverage and yet are critical in today's world. So let's start with the first one. 46% of hires fail within 18 months. That means that nearly half of all hiring decisions result in a mishire. Now, why is 18 months actually important? 18 months is important for a rather simple reason. At 18 months, it is roughly the moment you actually start to get a return on investment from the hire that you made. Just think about it. It takes 3 to 6 months to onboard someone into a business to full productivity. And most people mentally check out about 3 months before they leave. That means that you are actually getting only between 9 and 12 months of full productivity from someone if they leave at month 18. This is a huge business risk. And actually, it leads us to another harsh truth. Roughly 30% of hires are redundant. That means that nearly a third of the people that you are hiring, you don't need to hire. You could have actually rehired the people in your business. You could have actually looked at how you can utilize the staff you currently have in your organization, how you could have used AI or trained them to perform the duties that you are now hiring for externally. And this actually brings us to the final harsh truth. The cost of a rehire ranges between 2 and 20 times the annual salary of the person that you are replacing. Now, these are not my numbers. These are numbers from Deloitte, from McKinsey, from BCG, from GH Smart. And they take into consideration not only the actual cost of hiring, paying a recruiter, but also the time investment from your organization, from your people to interview, to assess, to find this person. It is the impact on culture. It is the opportunity cost. It is the lost sales. It is the increased likelihood that the people that stay behind will be more likely to leave your business if you are pushing them too far by having not enough capacity in your business, not having enough direction, not having enough clarity on what people need to deliver. And here's where this all leads us to. The biggest hiring mistakes happen before the first interview. We see hiring as, interviewing and making a decision about a person in our business. But actually, there's so much more to hiring because it boils down to our understanding of the role, how we define the role. And there are actually 3 big hiring problems that I see over and over and over again, and I have for the last 20 years. First of all, there's the vague role. Sure, you can say we're hiring for a back-end developer. But do you know why exactly you're hiring for a back-end developer? You list the skills, the years of experience, a job title, but no one is actually clear on what success in the role looks like. The mission is fuzzy, the purpose is unclear, the outcomes that you require this person to deliver are not defined. So the result is that every candidate will look wrong, and alignment is impossible because the one person that looks right to you doesn't necessarily look right to your interviewing partners. No clear mission means there's no way to align on outcomes, and there's no way to assess for fit. The next one is the interview mirage. The fact that someone speaks confidently does not mean that they can actually do the job. The fact that someone felt competent, that they were polished as a speaker, that they were likable, that you'd want to grab a beer with them is not evidence that they can actually deliver results in your business, in your context. This is also where we start to trust our gut and hope for the best. But the truth is that without structure, you're basically hiring for vibes, not for actual performance on the job, for the delivery of results. The fact that someone may tell you that they have skills doesn't mean that they're able to utilize those skills within your environment. This is why it is important to test for competence, not just accept confidence. And then there's the third one, and I'm guilty of this one on multiple occasions myself in my business. The fact that someone was available and you hired them means that you didn't actively decide that they are the right person for the job. You defaulted. And I totally get it. The pressure is on, there's a higher workload, the demands on the team are higher, and there is someone that happened to be there, they were available, and it simply felt easier to make a hiring decision than to qualify whether that person can actually deliver results in our business. And that leaves you scratching your head a few months later, wondering, why can't they actually do the job? And preparing to actually have that difficult conversation of letting them go. If you have no system to assess, if you have no repeatable system to assess, you are gambling and you are going to end up paying twice. That is how half of hiring decisions, these three mistakes, these three hiring problems, this is how we get to that number of 46% of hiring decisions ending in failure within 18 months. And the cost of that is obvious, between 2 and 20 times annual salary. So the big shift that I want you to take away from today is that we don't hire for tasks. We don't even hire for skills. We hire for outcomes. Most job descriptions list skills, tasks, and years of experience, but not what success actually looks like. If we can't define what success looks like in the job in 3, 6, 12, 18 months, neither can your team or your candidate, nor is it possible for you to actually decide whether you can delegate part of a job or the full job to AI. If we can't define the job, we cannot hope that whoever we hire will be able to define the job. This is why we need to focus on clear outcomes, because clear outcomes shift hiring from guessing to a strategic decision-making process. Do we need a human? Can we train existing people? Can we train existing people to use AI to do this? What can we actually do to delegate this job to AI? These are the questions we need to be asking when we're thinking of hiring a developer in 2026. So now it is time to actually define. And here I want to show you what I have been doing with my customers when we discuss defining a job, defining a role. Now, most companies will have some form of job description, but job descriptions, as we've already discussed, do not actually tell us whether someone will be successfully able to perform in the role. So, what I've done here is I've actually imported a job description. I've changed the name of the company, but this is a live job description from a company that was posted on LinkedIn. And it is a relatively good example of a standard job description. It lists skills, it lists tasks, it lists all the things that are amazing about the company. It even lists the things that this job is going to do, such as text editing assistance and automating slides. But if we put this job into Klareda, it's going to pick it apart. First of all, we're going to look at what is the purpose of the role. What is it actually meant to achieve? Well, in this case, we can actually extract this from this job description. But if we didn't have the job description, Klareda would be able to work through this with us. But here we're looking to turn early AI-driven concepts and prototypes into production-ready backend and full-stack features that integrate with the C++ core product, delivering reliable, high-quality functionality used by millions of business users. And I can get behind that purpose, that mission of the job. Now, if we look at why the job exists, it's to bridge AI research and product engineering so that promising automation and assistance features become robust, scalable, and widely adopted parts of the Think Sell product, improving user productivity and competitive differentiation. I can understand that. But here's where the problem begins. Do we have any tangible metrics that define success in this role? And this is where most job descriptions fail. This is where most job definitions fail. We don't define what are tangible metrics, and thus we do not know how to measure success. We don't know what feature adoption rates are. We don't look at what is the impact on the user base. We don't understand what improvements of time to production is. We don't understand what is reliability and performance targets. We don't have code quality metrics. We assume that people will just fall into place and figure it out. But unless we have defined success, we cannot expect people to figure it out. It is on us as leaders to define success. So what we do is we actually define success. And I have actually defined success metrics here. And with that, we can create a mission statement for the job, one that actually says, what is the overarching, what is the umbrella of success that this role is meant to deliver? But with this, we can also get from Klareda suggestions of what are smart outcomes, the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound outcomes that we want someone to deliver, the ones that will help us define whether someone is successful in the job in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months, in the first year, beyond the first year. And when we're defining a job, we want to define success over the short term, the midterm, and the long term. How do we know in 3 months from now that we have made the right hiring decision? How do we know in a year from now, if I walk into your office, that you have the right person in place? These are the questions you need to be answering before you post a job. Because unless you know what that is, unless the hiring team is aligned on the results, then you will forever struggle to make the right hire for your business. What's more, without clearly defining the outcomes, you will not be able to consider if you already have that person in your organization. Is there someone in your business that can do this job already or parts of this job? And finally, the big question: which of these outcomes can be fully delegated to AI? If you don't ask yourself that question today, you are at risk of making a hire that is redundant in the next 6 months. We've all seen how much progress has been done in AI. But wouldn't it be good to actually check whether it makes sense to hire someone or whether you should be looking at delegating parts of this job, automating it, using AI, and hiring people for higher impact in your business? And this is something we can check in Klareda. So in this case, we've gone through each of the outcomes and looked at whether any of them are fully delegatable. And there is one where there is an opportunity to delegate this. Now, if we're thinking of hiring developers in 2026, we also need to be thinking of how do we get them to utilize the power of AI in our business? How do we get them to actually delegate parts of their job, create the automations so that they can focus on the higher leverage, higher impact things that only a human can do? The real world context, the interpersonal relationships. And we can actually, with Klareda, ask it to integrate AI delegation into the outcomes that we're going to be hiring for, which is exactly what we've done. We have our smart outcomes for shipping first AI integrated features. It's a short-term outcome in this business. Delivering a production-ready back-end and front-end integration with one of the key AI features, example, the text editing assistance. But also a subtask of this is automation. This then builds our business as an AI-enabled business. It gives us that edge. And the interesting thing is each of these outcomes becomes an interview question. We can ask candidates in the interview how they have delivered production-ready back-end and front-end integrations for AI features. We can ask them how they have built TypeScript back-end scaffolding and API contracts from prototype specs using AI. That is how we learn whether the people not only have the skills, but also the adaptability and the ability to apply those skills in our business. But wouldn't it be nice to actually map those competencies, map the behaviors that we need to be assessing for each of the outcomes that we're hiring for? And this is exactly what we can do with Klareda. We can map core competencies that map directly to our company culture. Because yes, Klareda does have awareness of your company culture. It does have a database that we call company DNA that enables you to tell Klareda your mission, your vision, your values, your organizational chart, the behaviors, the competencies that drive success in your business. And we can map this to every outcome that you're hiring for. And these are your core competencies, the culture fit. But we can also map the secondary competencies, the culture add that you're looking to bring into the organization, the AI literacy, the product sense, the automation mindset, which you know will move the business forward. And with all of this mapped, the job purpose, its mission, the outcomes mapped to short-term results, mid-term results, and long-term results, and the competencies that you are hiring for that will enable someone to be successful in the role. With all of that, we can then generate interview questions. We can draft job descriptions. And we can send this to our team for their review to ensure that we are aligned. And these are the steps that Klareda can help you with. What do you want to do, Matthias? Do you want to look at some interview questions? Do you want to generate some job descriptions?
I would love to take a look at the job description.
Okay. Well, let's do it.
Yeah. And I mean, the two things that are just popping up in my mind, I think we had this discussion before. One is still haunting me, the question of potential. How do we assess that? And the other one is the dilemma companies find themselves in regards to candidate shortages, their employer brand, and you listed some of the reasons for mishires. And I guess one is maybe to add the one, we didn't have a better person and we made a decision out of an urge. And maybe that's the third one you listed, but those are the two things that are going through my mind right now.
Okay. Well, while we draft a job description, we're going to go with two here. While we begin drafting the job description, let's look at those questions for you. So, first of all, candidate shortages. There's a lot of candidates out there. The question is, are you giving them enough of a reason to consider wanting to work for you? If your job is 5 years backend Java development, that's no different to what they're doing right now. Although we may not have the brand pull of a Google or an Apple or an Amazon, for better or for worse, it is on us to define the job and ask ourselves honestly, is this an interesting job? And if it's not, what would make the job interesting? What is the opportunity for someone? Because let's not forget, hiring is a two-way conversation. It's not only about you wanting the candidate, it's also about the candidate wanting you. We've got 8 billion people in the world. That is definitely not a candidate shortage.
Not if you put it that way. I do think that it is the question, does the candidate want to work for our company? It is also in creating this profile, do you add some sort of reality check? Does the requirement match the
reality?
Does it make sense as a whole? Does it add up? I think that is maybe also not always the case, that you want more than you can actually pay for, or that the job actually can deliver because they don't have mandate. So
absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, there is no AI in the world that will be able to tell you that. And if someone tells you there is, they're dreaming, because AI does not have lived experience. It has guardrails, it has limitations, and we have built those limitations into Klareda. However, this is why when we define a job, this is very conceptual work. We need to be asked the right questions to bring out the information. But the sense checking, that's where the human lives.
That's good to know that they're still a part.
There is still work for us. There is definitely still work for us. Now, in terms of your second question, what was that? Can you repeat that?
I guess it was the potential part of
how to hire for potential.
Exactly. Or is that actually something we want to be doing? Having had discussions around that.
I think all of this, when we're hiring for outcomes, we are also hiring for potential. For the very simple reason, skills are static. And actually, the most important skill at the moment is the skill of acquiring skills. when we're assessing people against the outcomes that we intend them to deliver in our business, it is not going to be about assessing whether they have done exactly the same thing somewhere else. It is assessing how they are able to demonstrate that they have done similar things or have seen similar things, and how they have been able to pick up new skills, to learn, to adapt, to evolve as the situation demanded. That is what we're assessing for. When we understand where they've been, their past experiences, we can then start moving to saying, okay, given those past experiences, let me show you some context we've got in our business. Given your experience, how would you address this in our context? Can you? What would you need? What skills would you want support with? How would you want to grow? Is this even interesting for you? That's hiring for potential.
Yeah.
If someone can do all of the job that you are hiring for, they will very quickly outgrow that job. Which brings us back to that 46%.
Mm.
Unless you have the opportunity for people to grow, to acquire new skills, to test themselves, to challenge themselves, you will struggle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a way, wasn't really looking for the ultimate answer. Just I realized this is it's just a topic that comes up, and also those discussions you have with hiring managers, whether do they have the time to train someone, and it all relates back to what you just talked about. It's there is I guess there's a part that the system won't solve for us. It needs to be figured out by the hiring manager, by the recruitment manager, each taking their roles super seriously and challenging each other. And yeah.
I mean, look, as a leader, your job is the people. This was one of the
I agree.
hardest lessons for me to learn. When I first got a leadership position, it felt like I've got more responsibility and I still get to do the job that I was doing before. I actually became competitive with the team I was managing. That's not the job of a leader. And it's actually when someone took me aside a few months into the job and said, listen, your job is to clear the way for the people in your team to actually do the business. It's not to do the work that they're meant to do.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
It's a very hard lesson to learn, but it's a very important lesson to learn.
Yeah.
I think many leaders take too long to learn that lesson. So when you say onboarding people, well, the more engaged you are going to be in onboarding. And by the way, hiring and interviewing is part of onboarding. When they start, they've already gone through that. They know what they're getting themselves into. They should do. Then we can actually set people up for success. If you're hiring people and hoping that they just, figure the job out, you're going to lose them. You might as well hire by flipping a coin because the statistics are very similar.
Yeah.
Save yourself a lot of time. Flip the coin. So yeah, now back to the job description. We're going to call it a platform team. So this is where it comes in handy that Klareda actually knows our organization. Now, what is also important is that the job description is the internal document. This is the document that defines the full scope of the role, where it sits in the organization, how it is meant to perform, who it reports, who it interacts with. This allows us to take a step back and actually consider, do we already maybe have someone in this position? Remember, roughly a third of the hires that are being made could be delegated to a great extent to the people you already have in your organization. And I've seen this multiple times where companies will hire someone into the business only to realize that that meant that someone already in the business missed out on the opportunity for a promotion that they were after, resulting in that person leaving. So yes, you made a hire from outside, which cost you a lot of time and a lot of effort, but you also lost a person that was already in the business, that knew the business, that was onboarded, that was productive, and that should have been given the opportunity to grow in the business. Yeah, these are the questions we need to be answering. I'm just running through these, but normally we would be considering, and obviously on the back end, we've already got an organizational DNA built in. So it does have a lot of this information. Any questions so far, Matthias?
Nope. Just jealous of your dog. Seems to be having a good day.
Oh, he's having a great day. So there we go. Here's our job description and our job advert. And it's great because I can actually show you the difference. So the job description will show us the mission. It'll give us the outcomes over the short, mid, and long term. It'll map the competencies. It'll map them to the outcomes so that we can actually assess those competencies while we're discussing those outcomes with candidates. It'll help us narrow down what does fit, what does add, and what does adaptability in terms of culture mean. It'll help us map out the opportunities and benefits so we can check with candidates whether this actually aligns with what their expectations are. It'll give us the full rundown of the logistics for the role. This is what we use internally to align. This is what we use internally to agree this is our definition of success. And then we've got the job advert. This is what candidates see. This is what explains to candidates what's in it for them. What are the responsibilities? What are the requirements? What are the nice to haves? What are the benefits? Notice how this is more about what's in it for the candidate than for the company. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that this is a perfect job description and that I would copy and paste it directly, but directionally, it is tied to the outcomes, to the competencies, to the mission of the job. And that is what we are after, because that allows us to make the right hires for the business or make the right people decisions for the people we already have in the business. So with that in mind, what is one thing you would change about how you hire? That's a question for you.
Yeah, I was figuring that out. It feels like I'm in school and extra classes. No, I think we've had, again, referring to previous conversations, to me, it really starts with challenging the purpose of the role, or really the desired outcomes. As too many times I've observed, hiring is add one more of something we already know to cope with the feeling of increased workload. And that is, in the age of AI, not the way to run it, I guess. And it's too easy. And and I understand, because we have, back to hiring managers or managers and leaders, still working as individual contributors or believing they have to in order to cope with workload. And really, to detach from that, it takes time, it takes an invest, and it's sometimes easier to just add more of the same profiles or people, but it's definitely not the solution. And so that, for me, taking away the importance of that first step of really, I guess, profiling, what we call it back in the day.
One of the things that I wish more managers would experience when they are promoted is actually to be rehired into the role. They should be hired again into that management position, because that would enable them to have a clear idea of what are the expectations. That it's not about doing the same job they were doing before, being that individual contributor. Their job is creating leverage for the business through the people that they are managing. That is the true definition of leadership. And I think this is also the power of rehiring. It's not a bad thing to rehire people. It simply clarifies to them that the expectations have changed.
Yeah.
This is also why it's so important to use every performance review, that annual review or a quarterly review that you have, as an opportunity to rehire people. Because if you hired them a year ago for a job, I can guarantee you that job has changed. But do they understand that? Do they see how the job has changed? Do they see how the priorities of the business have changed and where they sit within that? And that's a huge communication problem that I see.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember not 10 years ago even, organizations that would hire sales team leaders with the prerequisite that your leadership role will be the 20% on top of your 100% of the working time. So that was basically that was the common expectation. This is what you do on top while still delivering and remaining the top performer in your team. And I think I would say on a broad scale that the understanding of leadership has changed significantly in the last couple of years, which is good. But I think the execution is still a bit behind, and there's work to do.
There's always work to do. That's part of the fun of running a business. And if you want more help putting this into action, on your side, you know where to find me.